Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom is directed by James Wan and stars Jason Momoa, Patrick Wilson, and among others. And this is the 15th and, as far as we know, is the final installment of the DC Extended Universe. And in this story, it deals with Arthur Curry, who has become King of Atlantis after the events of the first Aquaman film. And essentially, it deals with him having to defend Atlantis from Black Manta, who returns, and along the way he ends up going with his brother Patrick Wilson's character Orm from the first one, who have to team up in order to stop not only Black Manta but also discover the lost seventh kingdom of the seas. Now here's a little backstory. Now this movie was directed by James Wan, who, what can I say, I've always been an avid fan of, especially from his early days when he used to direct the Saw, when he directed Saw and done some other. He was really known more in the horror field, but I've always found him as a very fascinating director, especially when he came with movies like the first Saw film, Death Sentence, and things like that. And the first Aquaman, I'll admit, was actually a really fun surprise. It was definitely a really fun B-movie type of film that really knew what it was doing, and James Wan at the helm really fascinated me was very fascinated with being able to make a really big budget type of B-movie but make it work. And the cast in the first one were all, especially Jason Momoa playing the title character was just always a blast. And I did also enjoy the presence of Black Mantis in the first film. I just wish that he could have had more screen time because he was a more interesting villain, I felt like, compared to Orm, who, I kind of thought was more of a carbon copy of how they do with Loki in the MCU and stuff. And I know that's kind of a weird comparison from the comics and everything, but you could just definitely tell the first film was more of a it had that feeling more like Thor and stuff like that. But one of the biggest bright spots I enjoyed was Black Manta, and going into this film, it got me. I was curious, but at the same time, the DC Extended Universe has been on a rocky start with a lot of stuff going on behind the scenes, a lot of the changes that have happened now to where there's been a lot of stuff that's happened, and not only just the way that there was a lot of shifting in the actual direction and stuff, as far as what they want to do with the universe, but also, the controversy surrounding Amber Heard, that was a big deal for the last few years. And I'm not going to go into specifics on that, but pretty much it was established that there was a lot of reshoots and everything to where the movie pretty much had to go through a lot to get pretty much released. And it seems like there was a lot of stuff that you could really tell that the movie was going for that held it back from really reaching its full potential, I think, and even going into it. And upon finally getting released, with this now being the final film in the DC Extended Universe, I can say that wasn't bad, but I think that, it definitely could have been something that could have, at least been on that same kind of feel like the first film did in certain regards. But as it stands, it's definitely one of those movies that I don't mind, but I still think it's a drop compared to the first film. And it's definitely one that could have been a lot better, stronger payoff with the DC Extended Universe, but as it stands, it's still a decent watch. And so, to get my pros out of the way, I thought the cast in this were all great. Jason Momoa still shines as he always does as Aquaman. He's got that really good charisma that we saw in the first film. And I'll get to some of my cons with some of the writing that kind of holds it back, because there's certain dialogue and certain scenes or certain lines they give them here and there that do come across as a little too, I don't want to say cheesy, but it seems like it's really trying to keep that humor going. That does work to its advantage in certain scenes that I enjoy, but there are certain lines here and there they give them that I think do feel a little kind of cheesy at times, and a little too overboard when it comes to some of the one-liners. But he was still great. He really carries the movie. And I really enjoy his chemistry with Patrick Wilson. And Patrick Wilson coming back as Orm, basically having to play an anti-hero in this, I thought was really good. And him pretty much having to, banter back and forth, I thought was one of the biggest bright spots I really enjoyed. And I always did enjoy Patrick Wilson's performance in the first film. I just felt like the writing could have been, a lot more stronger with it, not really having him really much of a villain, so to speak, in the first one. So with here, they give him a lot more layers to his character that I actually found myself really enjoying, and was definitely interested in. I was actually more interested in where it was going with Orm than I kind of was with Arthur in this, surprisingly, because that kind of works it to its advantage, because there's some things in this that do kind of backtrack some of the stuff that we saw in the first film that Arthur learns. And so it seems like there was some stuff you could really tell that going behind the scenes that the writing was just trying to, go all over the place and everything. But to get my other pros out of the way, the rest of the cast are great too. It's the actor who plays Black Manta. I'm sorry if I can't get his name right. Yahya Abdul Mateen II. He was great in the first one. I really enjoy him here as well. And pretty much there's like this whole thing that he gets basically this kind of like, how do I describe it? It's basically the black tribal thing or whatever. And it pretty much makes him become more evil. And he ends up wanting to cause destruction and stuff. Now, there are moments in the film where he does really shine. And, you know, you get to see more of him a lot more in the first film. But I still also have some cons with his character that kind of hold him back from being a really great villain. Because a lot of it has to do with the fact that it really gets sidetracked on some other stuff and not really taken it to its full potential. But he was still great, though. And he definitely has a really menacing scene that I'm not going to spoil. But it really shows that, you know, how much of a really good villain he really could be if they really gave him a lot more material to work with. And then on top of that, you know, the rest, it's great seeing Dolph Lundgren back in like the first one again. He gets to do a little bit more this time, and it also is funny hearing John Rhys Davies come back as the kind of like crab-like type of creature from the first film. And he definitely was one of the biggest scene stealers because he had a lot of funny lines I enjoyed. And then, you know, the way that it goes with the whole kind of like buddy comedy kind of aspect with Arthur and Orm I thought was really fun, and it had a great humor to it. And the action scenes, they're really good, the way they're shot and everything. There are some where it does get a little CGI overboard at times, but the way that one was able to still keep the action flowing, especially when it gets toward its climax, I thought was really fun. And, you know, just a lot of the different, the adventure type of feel that it's going with, you know, shines in certain aspects. And I also got to give it credit too. There's a cool type of like 80s synthesizer score that they kind of go with. Well, it may not necessarily be a synthesizer, but it kind of has that feeling like you're hearing from the 80s. And I thought, you know, working on that kind of level really goes with the vibe, especially with the villains like theme song and stuff at parts. And so that was great. When it gets to some of the areas undersea that we haven't seen before, like in the first film, I thought it was a nice touch, especially when they get in this part where they get to where they get all these different like fish that reminds me something like Jabba the Hutt and stuff. I thought it was a really funny scene, and just this kind of world, it's kind of like a casino world and stuff. I thought it was a lot of fun. So there are some really cool elements that, you know, when you're seeing more of the kingdoms and stuff as it goes along, and some of the other places that we haven't seen in Atlantis, you know, it really showcases a lot of the world that's built up with it. But this is now where I have to shift into my cons, and I will say that one of the biggest things I have the issue with the most is the fact that we do this whole setup when it's regarding with Black Manta going to get revenge on Arthur from the events of the first film. And I thought at first that was going along with that to see where it was kind of heading, because I was actually kind of blown away that from the trailers that it was kind of like misleading because we don't really get that actual feeling. Because in all honesty, it really feels like Black Manta doesn't really have much of a threat in this compared to what I thought it would. Because what I thought where it was going to go, and I'm not going to go into too much detail to avoid spoilers and stuff, but it really seems like when he basically tries to go head to toe with, you know, Atlantis and everything like that, it really seems like he has a very limited army to try to back him up to go after Atlantis. And there's a crucial plot point that comes in later of what his plan is and stuff. But the problem I have as far as his motive and everything is that they spend the whole majority of him trying to get revenge and stuff. And there's also this thing about him pretty much trying to get this kind of bigger villain that they set up as well. And that really kind of comes into wasted potential because there's a lot of they do like a lot of scenes where he's kind of just like planning his stuff and things like that, and send like his minions to do his work and everything. And it really seems like there could have been a lot more stakes that could have been more in place, and there could have been a lot more destruction that happened and stuff like that. And there's just a whole lot more that we could have really seen that could have, you know, really showcased more what he could do. And that's the biggest disappointment I have with it, is that there really is no stakes with this. Because anytime, I'm not going to go into any spoilers or anything, but there are characters in this that feel like they could pretty much go at any time, but the movie backpedals and making it think to where it's like, no, that character's, it's like, I don't like to use this term because it's kind of a cheap way of explaining stuff, but plot armor is pretty much very heavy in this. There's a lot of instances where characters could easily either get killed or they're too afraid to kill a character off because of plot convenience. And I think that's the really big mishandle that they probably should have done more with. I know it's hard to do sometimes when it comes to things that work in context with the way the story plays, But that's something that I really wish they could have done more with to this advantage, because there's at least a couple times I'm like, okay, that's just kind of really getting away with a lot of stuff that's convenient like that. And on top of that, one of the most disappointing things too is the fact that I'm not going to go into spoilers or anything at all, but just the way they kind of really explain William Dafoe's absence in this, I thought was kind of really, really a very cheap way, and it just really makes me really feel like there's more that we could have really got more explored with that. And it's a shame that William Dafoe didn't come back for this movie, because I think that his presence is really absent in this movie. Well, and getting to more with Arthur in this, even though I enjoy Jason Momoa's performance in this, as him evolving as a father and stuff like that, and things that they do set up that has potential, I just kind of really didn't really get the motive behind his character in this, because he's basically going through the same thing he did in the first film, where he's not really wanting to be a ruler for Atlantis and stuff, and that he's really only do it for his own, just to keep the things in line so that they don't attack the surface and everything. And I really think that, there's more they really could have explored with his character that really could have gave us more of why he's choosing to do what he does for it, because it really just seems very lazy when it comes to the writing in this. I just felt like there's more that they could have given a better motivation for him to really earn his way in trying to be the actual good ruler for Atlantis and stuff, and because especially what he had to go through in the first film. And it also comes into play where it's like, okay, are we just basically rebooting the first film again? Because it almost seems like the first film really had no relevance with his arc and with where he went. And then on top of that, going into some other stuff like with Amber Heard, look, I'm not going to go into controversy or anything, but just as her character, I liked her performance in the first film. And on just going with the writing itself, it feels like there's really nothing to her character in this, because she's in it more than I thought she would, and I feel like there's more they could have either put more at stakes or could have done some stuff to really make her presence a lot more there, if that makes sense. And it just really seems like there's something that really happened behind the scenes to where they cut a lot of her scenes out, and there's also some really obvious editing choices that show to where she comes up at random scenes just out of nowhere, and I'm like, okay, there's really there's got to be some like really a longer cut of this film that we probably didn't get, or a lot of stuff that was originally shot that to really better explain the way these scenes flow out. And that's not just completely her. There's some other parts where characters just show up out of nowhere at conveniences, like they're off of Grand Theft Auto 5 just spawning, and I'm like, okay, there's got to be some way that they probably knew to get there and stuff like that. On top of that too, there's also some really noticeable more bad CGI at times in some of the underwater scenes that do really stick out at points. I guess, didn't really blend well. It mainly has to do with some of the action sequences they shoot, where there's certain creatures that they show at times that I think could have been, and this has always been a problem with a lot of the DC films, and even some of the ones I enjoyed are guilty of it. But there are some bad CGI points here and there that do look obvious. But that's really my biggest thing, is that there's so much like more potential that this movie could have really had more in place, and some of the lines that come here and there when it comes to being on that kind of like one-liners and stuff does get a little old here and there, and not every joke lands. But other than that, I mean, I still got into the whole adventure vibe, so to speak, because the stuff that's involved with Arthur and Orm is really the biggest strong point. And the potential of where it was really going, and some of the stakes they do try to set up, had potential on where it was going. I just feel like once it gets toward the climax, even though it is, shot competently in certain scenes, in some of the action parts and stuff like that, it just really feels like there was more to it than what we could have got. And that's always been the case with a lot of the DCEU films, because it always seems like, especially the ones where they take away the director's vision and stuff, or they have to make a lot of changes, you can obviously tell that it's putting movies out like this that don't really reach their full potential than what they could be. And so with this being a drop from the first film, I don't mind it. I mean, it's still a decent watch, and as part of the DCU, I'll still own it one of these days, but I still think the DCU could have went out on a better high note. And so with that, I'm going to give the film an average Joe on the Film Freaks meter. And so, for those of you who have also seen Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom, and also the other films in the DC Extended Universe, let me know in the comments below what you thought about it, and thank you so much for watching, and Merry Christmas, and Happy Holidays, and I'll see you in my next review. I'll see you later.